Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Tim and Sean discuss patio planting with Japanese maples.
Howdy, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Y'all, I'm Tim.
And I'm Sean.
And today we're bringing you patio planting with Japanese maples, landscaping your garden with Mr. Maple, y'all. This is an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about patio planting and why it's important, what it is, and some recommendations for those patio plantings, whether there's Japanese maples or companion plants, why Japanese maples make great patio planting, and considerations when you're trying to figure out what will do well in your patio planting area, and how to be successful and enjoy your patio planting.
I'm really excited for this one because patio planting, we've done these other videos where we've talked about foundation planting, we've talked about walkway, we've talked about backdrop planting, and patio planting. I'm excited for this one because I think a lot of people overlook using your patio as an extension, not only as an extension of your house, but an extension of your garden. And I'm really excited to be able to, talk about this and use this topic as a podcast. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, I know many people have been saying that many of our other plantings, whether it's walkway, background, focal point, foundational planting, those were Friday videos on our Mr. Maple Show. So you can go check that out on YouTube, go to the Mr. Maple Show and see those videos. But this one's going to be a little more in depth because we've got a little more time being as a podcast. We can thoroughly flesh out some of these ideas even more. So we're super excited to be bringing this today. If you want to go see those other videos, go check those out on our Mr. Maple Show on YouTube. Y'all, patio planting, it's about gardening where you're going to be, right? I mean, You're going to be in your patio and enjoying it. That's where you got your grill. That's probably where you got a nice sitting area. These little grotto areas, that is really where you need to be gardening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in your garden, unless you're out there working your garden, or just going out there to enjoy your garden, that's where you're going to be spending most of your time is at the patio. Whether it's just you relaxing, or if you're entertaining, and you're outside, that's mainly where you're going to come together is at the patio.
I mean, plants reduce stress. They've actually shown that in cities that actually have plantings around the cities, it reduces the stress versus a concrete jungle, essentially, whenever it's just no plants and just concrete and buildings everywhere. And that's the same with your garden area. If you take the place where you're going to be trying to relax and you garden it, you're going to be more relaxed and more stress-free. And
like I kind of mentioned before, but it's an extension of your garden. You spend so much time working and trying to get your garden to look at best as it can and to be aesthetically pleasing. So why not extend it to where you're going to be sitting?
I mean, I think that's one of the most important things is you build these patios to actually get out and enjoy, your outside. You're going to be sitting out there having picnics. You're going to be having barbecues. You're going to be having friends over. And that's going to be one of the places we're going to go enjoy time. So why not make that place baller?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the reasons Japanese maples are great patio plantings, because they can make those places baller. They can make them awesome. They can add some color, texture, size. I mean, so unique and something that's classy out there in your garden.
And so you need to take some considerations, though, when you plan your patio garden, and there are some things you want to keep in mind, and one of those is size. How big is your patio? But not only just the size of your patio, but the size of the plants in your garden and around that patio.
That's a great point. I mean, you got your patio, and patios are typically, something that's concrete or brick or something like that out there. That's some sort of hard surface you've got out there that you've got as your starting point for your patio. And Japanese maples, they've got non-invasive roots. And that's a big benefit is their roots are never going to mess up your patio. They're never going to mess up your patio while you're trying to enjoy it by having this huge tree. A magnolia, you can't always say that about some of the magnolias. They've got big roots. they'll grow towards the patio and your house. I mean, you got to consider too, this is not just your patio you're dealing with. That's typically really close to your home. And the last thing you want to do is mess up the foundation of your home.
Right. And then sun exposure. What kind of sun exposure is your patio getting? Which direction does your patio face? These are all things you want to keep in mind because, again, you don't want to throw something in there that's not going to thrive and do well.
I mean, sun's always important. One of the most critical things with Japanese maples is drainage. Hopefully that this is so close to your home, you're going to have good drainage at your patio because people try to run the drainage away from their homes. But it's such an important consideration. We had to put this in here.
And you talk about with the drainage that people are trying to divert the water away from the home. But keep in mind, if your patio has a slant to divert it away, make sure that if you're putting something in the ground around your patio, that you're not overwatering from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's really important to consider. Overwatering Japanese maples is probably one of the number one killers of a Japanese maple. Japanese maples, though, they're just perfect for these patio plantings. When you go through these considerations for size, sun exposure, drainage, and they just fit.
And then something else you want to consider is, and I think maybe this is probably the most fun part of it, of designing a patio planting, but how is the rest of your garden laid out? Is your patio, because, a lot of times you come out of your house onto a patio, that can essentially kind of be your entrance into your garden. So how is the rest of your garden laid out so that your patio is actually part of that garden, an extension of that garden?
Yeah, I mean, off camera before we started, you mentioned that sometimes your patio is the entrance to your garden. And when it's the entrance to your garden, sometimes it's the beginning of your walkway.
Absolutely.
And we've got a full video on patio planting with, or a whole video on walkway planting with Japanese maples, landscape your garden with Mr. Maple on the Mr. Maple Show on YouTube. You go check that one out if you want more details on sort of how to cultivate the entrance to your garden whenever even using Japanese maples.
And that kind of leads into, okay, now we're talking about what are we going to, how are we going to use our patio to extend that garden? And the first thing we talked about was, well, let's start with the perimeter of the patio. What are things that we can do to just really make that patio pop, but it's not necessarily because, the obvious is like, oh, patio planting, we're just going to, put stuff in the containers, which is important and we're going to get onto, but you really want to think about the perimeter of that patio and what you can do to make that patio become and flow into that garden.
First thing I think about whenever I think about a patio, I've got fair skin. I think about shade because I need protection from the hot afternoon sun. And if you've got a patio, typically it's open on top because you're outside enjoying the outdoors. And I like to have some tree cover out there.
And that's where, we talked about before, you say that, I remember, coming from Memphis, how you'd go in people's backyards and people would go out and buy those big sunshades, those sails, and they'd put up poles and have shades running over because they want that shade. And this kind of leads into why Japanese maples make great patio planting, especially for the perimeter. If you go with something like a Siriu, it's got vigor. But it also, since it has that vigor, it's going to get up there and create a natural shade over your patio. It's
got that lace leaf and that upright style. And it's one of the few trees that has it, so it gives a soft feel out there. And, shade that you put up there, man-made, is okay. I mean, those umbrellas, the wind takes off, and then all of a sudden those things are flying across your yard into the neighbor's yard. But you put a tree out there, and it's got roots in the ground holding it up. You don't have to worry about that when a windstorm comes. And so something awesome to think about is trees like Siri that get out there, make that statement. Green, excellent, super heat tolerant, good fall color. I mean, that's an excellent recommendation. When I'm thinking about sitting under a tree too, my first thought is fire glow.
Oh yeah.
Fire glow when the sun hits it with morning or afternoon afternoon sun, it glows. It's got like an orange-red backside of the leaf, and it's a red, upright Japanese maple. But it has this glowing effect from underneath. So if you're sitting in a patio, and I've got a table there and you're looking up and you're looking into a fire glow, man, you're going to have that really cool glowing effect that adds just that extra feel out there in the garden. I think shade is really important in these patio or grotto areas, because if it's hot, you're not likely going to go sit out there and enjoy your garden. So by providing some shade out there with some Japanese maples, you can really add something extra to your garden and get the shade and spend more time out there as well.
And that fire glow, I think, is great, because you talk about that. Not only are you providing shade, but you talk about those colors. You talk about sitting under there and getting those colors with the sun shining there, and you're bringing that red. There's so much green in the landscape. It's just, you go anywhere, there's always going to be green in that landscape. But to bring that red up closer to it, to your patio, is excellent. But something else, so we're talking about those bigger shade trees, but something you want to keep in mind is your viewpoint from that patio. So you don't want to block your viewpoint as well. You want to be able to look out into your garden, because it's an extension. It's part of your garden. It could be your like we said, your entrance into your garden. But you don't want to block that. So when you're sitting there, you want to be able to sit back, enjoy, look at your garden. So you want to, consider some low options as well along your perimeter. And, we're talking something like Golden Falls, with that yellow, but it's going to weep. It's not going to get too high, and you can stake it if you want to get a little height to it, but you got something that you can get that color again, color, texture. Golden Falls, that yellow, anything that's yellow is going to brighten. So you can brighten up that spot, but you're not going to block your overall view. I mean,
I like Golden Falls because in the springtime, you get that red border around it. It looks like Katsura, but it has such a cascading habit. Like you mentioned, you can have it as a ground cover out there, which is so dynamically interesting to have a deciduous ground cover that's a Japanese maple that can give you amazing fall color. I mean, you get some really nice oranges and reds out of Golden Falls, but that yellow color it gives all throughout the spring and summer and early fall is amazing for Golden Falls. I think that's an excellent dynamic out there to not block your view of your garden from your patio, but actually being able to enjoy that as well. Something like Kiome is another low, flat top Japanese maple that would do great in not blocking your viewpoint from your patio or grotto. It has more of a toadstool shape, so it stays low and has a lot of horizontal branching. Early spring, it's got a purple-red border as well, so it's kind of interesting dynamically there as well. But it's got a dense shrub-like shape. So this is a shrub-like Japanese maple that's easy to put out there and not block those views.
And I recommend go check out our walkway planning video. It was walkway planning with Japanese maples, landscaping by MrMaple. Check that out, because you talked about that being the shrub. You can apply some of the same things we talked about in that video, where you can almost use it kind of as that shrub replacement. You see a lot of times people run a shrub around the border of their patio. Kiome, mass plant it in that same effect, use it in the same manner, but you get color, texture that you're not going to normally get out of something else.
And one thing I also think is really important in this spot is you've got shade, you've got a viewpoint, but another thing to consider is, what do you not want to see? What do you want to screen out? And you can actually use a Japanese maple to create a focal point that blocks that out as well. And like I mentioned earlier, Japanese maples are pretty baller, and if you've got space, you can always put a specimen-sized Japanese maple in to draw attention away from those spots you really don't want to see, because everyone's eyes are going to be on the Japanese maple itself. I think color is a great way to draw their eye away from what you're doing, and you can actually use some Japanese maples that might actually be able to block that area as well. And with, we do 1,500 different varieties of Japanese maples at MrMaple, and you can go through on MrMaple.com and select the tree that you think sort of fits that shape best to block that area out. Something like a Tamukiyama is going to get 5 to 6 feet in height and 5 to 6 foot in width and a cascading umbrella, but give you a good red color. It's heat tolerant. It's easy to grow. It's a Japanese maple that's easy to use out there in the landscape. For people who are in high heat settings, it holds its color very well. It holds its color very well all across the country, but it's important because those high heat areas don't, some of the red varieties don't hold their color as well. It also leaves out 2 weeks later so it can handle higher elevations where you get those early frosts that come in. It's a classic red lace leaf. Tamukiyama is an excellent sort of red cascading lace leaf to put out there so that you can actually block some smaller things out there in the landscape. Maybe you can use it to block, like an air conditioning unit or something along those lines.
You mentioned Tamukiyama, and it makes me think of at your parents' garden, you have those 2 Tamukiyamas right there at that front patio. It doesn't get too high, so from the patio, you're able to overlook into the garden. But the way you did the mass planting with the high graph and then the low graph in front of it, how it adds movement. It almost like it flows where you got that lower one as it grows in together, I think is a great way, because we're talking about around the perimeter and blocking. I think that is a great example of how to use a Tamukiyama around a patio.
Well, the interesting thing about the Tamukiyamas there as well is they have such an interesting structure. They're weeping umbrella cascading habit. You can actually look up into the Tamukiyama while you're sitting on the porch on that patio. And it's just something really cool to be able to just look in and see the twisting and the umbrella unique sort of twist to it. Tamukiyama is interesting dynamically there. And that's one of the things that will draw people interest, because there aren't many other trees that are shaped this way. And so texturally, it's visually appealing and something you're always going to be, looking at, whether it's in leaf, whether it's in spring, summer, or fall color, or out of leaf.
And I think another one, you're talking about those colors and a way to maybe block something or like that is Twombly's Red Sentinel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent one. That flagpole of color out there, it's red leaf. It's almost like a columnar fire glow. We mentioned fire glow earlier. It has those same colors, that same kind of glowing like effect, some cherry red spring color, some bright red fall color, some good maroon throughout the rest of the season. And it is an amazing, narrow growing tree.
And it adds that vertical interest. And I push that every time when we talk about something, how important vertical interest is. That's a great one to add that near your patio as well.
I mean, think about if you've got on the side of your house, an unsightly pipe that's sticking out of your house. You've got something that's running up along the wall that you're trying to block. You can put a Twombly's out there and block that visually very easily and can seal it. And it doesn't even, it hides it super well without taking up a lot of space.
And so with these, we're talking about adding Japanese maples, but, you want to add some companion plants to kind of make things pop a little bit more, have those color, contrast, have the texture contrast with each other. So companion plants are important as well. And, when we're discussing what would you plant? And your first, like a dwarf conifer. And I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think something like Builtmore Blue, it's a Pinus strobus. It's a white pine, and white pines are native to the United States, the Pinus strobuses. This was a witch's broom that was found on the Builtmore estate. So obviously it's got some baller history as well. And it's this dwarf mutation, this witch's broom that was found in it growing in a tree. And just looked like a little squirrel's nest. And they had a marksman go out, shoot the witch's broom out, and then they grafted it. And then they get a small, dense, compact dwarf that gives you good blue color out there. We're talking about Builtmore because it's on the Builtmore estate, and blue because it's got that blue color. So Builtmore Blue, perfect name for it. 4 to 5 feet in height, 4 to 5 foot in width. So it's not going to take up a lot of space. It's not going to block a lot of vision out there. But at the same time, it can give you some good blue color that you can't find in many other places in nature.
And then, think about the companions. I always like to bring flowers or something that flowers and buds and flowers and up to the patio. And that makes me think of an azalea, something like Hino Crimson. I mean, to bring that closer around the patio, I think is just killer.
Yeah, I mean, Hino Crimson is a Kiome azalea, and the Kiome azaleas bloom so heavily that the blooms, you don't even see many of the leaves. The blooms are just out there, and the red color is outrageous. And Hino Crimson is probably one of the more popular Kiome azaleas in the trade today. It's easy to grow. It grows in many gardening zones all across the United States, and it's beautiful. And it just gives you that bright red color in that spring time frame that is just outrageous. And that's one of the things you'll really like having out there is changing of the seasons. And that's one of the reasons Japanese maples make such great companion plants, but putting something out there like a Builtmore Blue that gives you a consistent color adds more to your Japanese maple. But then having something out there like a Hino Crimson that adds flowers, also, it just contrasts so well with what you've got out there.
And I just want to add, when we're talking about with companion plants, just keep in mind that you're planting them too close to the Japanese maples, that you're not going to throw off, maybe something requires more watering than your Japanese maple requires, or vice versa. Maybe your Japanese maple will require more water than something else. You want to keep a happy balance between them. So, when you're thinking about what you like as a companion plant and what you're going to throw in, just keep that in mind.
And then, and we talked about blooms. Hydrangeas make great trees out there in the patio planter. Often you'll be out there enjoying it and you'll think, hey, I want to, trim some of these hydrangea blooms and bring them inside even sometimes as well, just to extend your garden inside the house. But Miss Sayori, that is one of my favorite hydrangeas to put out there because it's so dynamic in its bloom. Miss Sayori is a hydrangea macrophylla that was developed in Japan with a breeding program that creates very unique double bloomed hydrangeas. What I mean by double bloom is you've got that big cluster of blooms, right? But that whole cluster of blooms is made up by hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller, tiny blooms. And on that tinier bloom that makes up that bigger bloom, it's not just a single bloom. It actually has like a bloom inside of the bloom on top of that. And so you get more petals in there that are more dynamic. But Miss Sayori is variegated on top of that. I mean, the bloom itself is outrageous. And so you've got this amazing just multitude of pink and white variegated blooms that make this bigger bloom. And did I mention that the foliage on Miss Sayori is maroon? So you get this maroon red on the foliage as well. So next level hydrangea, love it to death. And those intricacies of the bloom that contrast so well on that maroon foliage, something that can add some color out there on your patio gardening, but it can also because it's so close, you can really see the intricacies and the details on the double blooms and the variegation.
I'm so glad you said something about the foliage, because I think with hydrangeas, a lot of times most people focus just on the bloom. Don't underestimate foliage on hydrangeas. There's some killer ones out there. Just don't think about what color it's going to be or what the blooms look like. Foliage matters, especially with hydrangeas. And you can do you talk about that maroon. You get something like we talked about Tamukiyama before, but if you get something like, waterfall with that green, and then you got that maroon from the hydrangea, you got that color contrast and that texture. You got those big leaves. Don't underestimate foliage on hydrangeas.
I love the color yellow. When we're talking about foliage, Little Honey, the Hydrangea Corsopholia that has the yellow leaves and those big white oak leaf blooms. I mean, that is a next level hydrangea to add out there to add color and add that yellow color, but also, play off your Japanese maples in your garden. You can never have too much yellow is my philosophy. And Little Honey is a great way to add that yellow in a small space. But those big leaves on Hydrangea Corsopholia are amazing. But Hydrangea Corsopholia is heat tolerant. It's actually native to the Southeast. And it gives you good fall color. So you actually get fall color out of the leaves on a hydrangea, which is outrageous. So throwing out Little Honey is another really cool companion plant.
I couldn't disagree more. Little Honey, I've got one in my front yard, and I'll tell you what, it could put some Japanese, some seasons, during fall, it can compete. And, sometimes I'm like, what? This Little Honey's got better fall color than that over there right now. I'll be like, don't miss out on it. It's legit.
Now, we can't talk about patios without talking about how you can extend your garden, not just from the perimeter of the patio, but into the patio itself. And I'm not talking about cutting holes in your concrete. I'm talking about container planting with Japanese maples. They're excellent for container planting, and your patio is a great place for them.
Oh, absolutely. Great way to bring the garden into the patio, not just around it, but into the patio. But there are some things you want to make sure that you consider. And one of those is, like you talked about earlier, a lot of times your patio is going to be some type of rock or brick or a concrete slab. All those things during the summer can, create residual heat. So you want to keep that in mind, is if I'm bringing something up here, is that extra heat. Because when you put something in a pot, you're changing the zone essentially. And I know that, the zones have more to do with cold temperature, but still it's going to affect the heat of the roots. So you want to keep that in mind. Is my patio going to cause stress to my tree in the container?
Yeah, and so think about where you're putting this tree in the container itself. There are definitely varieties that are more heat tolerant than others. But if you've got some of that vertical shade that we were talking about before, obviously putting it where it gets some sunlight, but some of that shade as well, is a great way to be able to plant a tree in a container to extend that garden. My favorite thing on gardens, though, is when you have these patios, is to have a little bit of shade, designed out there in the garden. If you don't have a tree out there to give you some shade out there, almost like a lattice house above your patio area is amazing. And that's also an area that Japanese maples thrive and do well in. And so I thrive and do well in it because it gives me some shade, and it can also be good for the Japanese maple. But when you're looking at containers, Japanese maples are ideal. They do so well in containers because they're so durable, but also they're a tree that has that shallow non-invasive root system. That same root system I talked about that said, it's not going to mess up the concrete, also means that this tree is going to be happy and grow really well in a container. And you can almost dwarf a Japanese maple down by growing in a container and enjoy this tree in a smaller space.
Now, and also keep in mind, if you are doing it in a container, make sure that you got good drainage, that you're not holding any moisture, that you're letting it dry out in between waterings. Just like being in the ground, drainage is really important.
And I think that is probably the key with containers. I mean, we don't want that bowl of death. I've often joked that if you've got a container that doesn't have a hole in it, you've got something you can eat cereal out of, not something you want to plant a Japanese maple in. It's got to have holes. It's got to have drainage. And you can actually go take a container, and often if it's made out of plastic or, I wouldn't necessarily always do this out of a clay pot or something that's going to break, but you can actually drill holes in the bottom of these pots to add extra drainage. And I think that's critical. And if you've got a clay pot, the way you add extra drainage is you add a lot more gravel in the bottom of the pot when you're planting. Because if you add that gravel, that thin layer of gravel or a little bit thicker layer of gravel on the bottom, essentially it drains through all the gravel and then through that bigger hole in the bottom of the pot. And it's important to keep watch on this too, to always make sure that the drainage continues to flow through the container all the way through those holes, because sometimes your holes in the bottom of a pot can get clogged up. But you notice this when you're out there watering. If you're watering the tree and there's not water coming through, then something's up. And you got to realize, hey, I might be essentially drowning the roots of my Japanese maple. And I think it's important to realize too, that if you've got, say, like a wood deck for your patio, sometimes like a pot can get suctioned down to that wood deck. And so something like, I think they have like pot feet that you can actually buy and put on the bottom of your container. That will actually raise it up just a little bit, so you've got good drainage. But our cheat code that we've always done is take a paint stirrer, cut it up, and you can actually slide that underneath your container, and that just continues that drainage all the way through the pot, through the bottom, and actually allows that water to come out underneath the pot.
And you might be asking, well, why Japanese maples on your patio? And I think, why Japanese maples? Just like the answer for every other, why Japanese maple in your garden? Color, texture, shape. I mean, that's, part of it all. But Japanese maples, like you said, in a container, you can keep them small, but with those non-invasive roots, you can keep them in a pot. And Japanese maples don't mind being in a container, don't mind being in the pot. So you can bring those aesthetics that you have out in your garden all the way up to the patio, up to your house. And that's why, for me, Japanese maples is an easy answer.
For me, why Japanese maples? Well, I started learning that if I had annuals in a pot, I had to replace those annuals every single year, every single season, and they were just sort of died off on me. And when I put a Japanese maple out there in that same container, the Japanese maple was easier to take care of. It's low maintenance. And that's one of the things I love about Japanese maples for this patio planting area. They're low maintenance landscape. And that's what everyone's looking for. And in a container, Japanese maples are low maintenance. And it's not something that you have to keep always going out there and replacing. It's something that grows in value with age. And it becomes something that is dynamically pleasing and more beautiful as it grows.
And something I would recommend with container gardening with the patio is don't be afraid to use levels. A lot of times you see people when they take this approach of container planting on the patio, they just have a pot with a tree in it in a certain location sitting on the ground. Don't be afraid. We talked about some of these weepers, like for your patio, if you have an overhang or something like that, you can put it in a pot and let it weep down. At my house, we have a Dragon Master, and we actually have a couple rocking chairs on our front patio. And in between that, we've got a table that kind of sits up, and we have a Dragon Master sitting on there weeping down. So don't be afraid with containers. They don't always have to sit on the ground, especially with the patio. Add some different movements with it. You can raise one up, have it on a stand, have some on the ground. Don't be afraid to use different levels with those containers. That's
an excellent point. I also think it's important to know that just because you've got one container out there doesn't mean that you can't have multiple containers. Visually, it's pleasing. Don't just put two plant containers sitting side by side. It'd be hard to dynamically make that interesting. But you can start with a small container and put a smaller Japanese maple in that, a medium container, a larger Japanese maple in that, and a larger container, and put a larger Japanese maple in that, and group those near each other, really close together, and have something that's dynamic that you can change the variation in color in the spring, summer, and the fall to really give something that's very pleasing and interesting in your patio planting area.
So y'all might have noticed that, before when we were talking about the perimeter, we were talking about companion plants. Now we're talking about containers. So, do companion planting with containers, but, be careful that you're not putting those companion plants in the same container. Because again, water requirements, different requirements. Be careful that, a couple of mine that are in containers, seed them. We'll have that in the pot. That's cool, because it'll fend for itself. It doesn't throw off the Japanese maple, but you don't want to throw something in there that's going to throw off your Japanese maple.
Oh, I got to tell you about this. This was a horror story. Matt and I, when we were young, we used to go to some different plant sales and pick up trees to then resell at garden shows. And we were down at this plant sale down in Georgia, and there's somebody that supplies some bigger box stores, and they actually had some larger Cereus in patio planters. And they had this big Cereus in a patio planter, but they didn't take these companion plants in consideration. This was really just we're throwing some plants in there, and they'd put pampas grass in with the Cereus. I mean, the pampas grass has invasive roots. It's going to take over almost the entire container. But to fight that out, they put a Japanese yew in there as well. So they had a Japanese yew in there, pampas grass, two things that are going to have more invasive roots than a Japanese maple and are going to root that tree out. I mean, that's exactly what you don't want to do. And so what you're going to want to do is choose something else that has non-invasive roots. Choose something like a low-growing sedum. I love Creepin' Jenny. I love like Angelina sedum. They give you some yellow colors, especially if the tree you're choosing doesn't have yellow foliage. They contrast so well with your Japanese maple. And another thing to consider about choosing your companion plant is making sure that you don't choose something, like you mentioned with the landscape, that's going to need more water than your Japanese maple. If you choose a lot of annuals and you put in there and you're always watering your annuals to make sure that their leaves are perked up, there are a lot more maintenance in that than there is with your Japanese maples, first off. But secondly, if you're watering your annuals so much to make sure that they're happy, you may be overwatering your Japanese maples. When you're talking about Acer palmatum, Acer japonicum, Acer shirasawanums, you're talking about trees that like to get wet and then they like to dry out. They like to get wet and then dry out. They like that process of drying out, and they prefer to be on that drier side more of the time than on that wetter side. And if they're always on that wet side, you can actually cause phytophthora root rot. That's one of the reasons why we push so heavily about drainage and its importance in containers, especially because that is one of the number one causes of death of a Japanese maple. It may be great for an indoor plant. You know, indoor plants often have that saucer underneath them that allows the water not to get on your floor in your home. Outside, you don't want that. And you don't want that on something that is a tree that's naturally going to be growing outside because it's gonna give it a root rot. And that's just the nature of many of your outdoor plants, especially some of your deciduous ones.
And I think if we're talking about companion plants in a container, I think it's easiest and best, and also being able to arrange them as companion plants on the patio, is find a companion plant that will do well in a container and use that. And let it be in its own container.
Now let's talk about some Japanese maples that make great container plants. And when it comes to container plants, first off, Japanese maples are the rock stars of container plants. If you see a tree in a container, often it's going to be a Japanese maple. And if not, the people just haven't learned about Japanese maples yet who built that container, because they're some of the best trees. They add flash, they add flare, they're great focal point plantings, but they also can be used to give this interesting dynamic and leaf texture in the garden you can't get on any other tree.
You know, one of my favorites, I would have to say, is, and you know, for some people, I'll be like, oh, that's a classic, but it's not, you know, because, you know, a lot of people want to bring that, you know, variegation or something flashy. But one of my favorites is a Rhode Island Red. You can bring that classic look of a blood good to your patio. You don't want to get a blood good and throw that in a container. It's going to get, you know, it's going to get upright. It's going to get big. But a Rhode Island Red, you can bring that classic look up to your patio. You can keep it in it gets that kind of globular shape, but you get that classic look. And then, man, I also think Rhode Island Red's just a tank. We have a customer that comes to all our open houses, and you know, when he came, he's like, okay, Sean, what do you recommend? What should I get? And I said, Rhode Island Red. He's like, oh, I've got one. And let me show you this picture. And his patio, he's got the patio that comes out, and he's got a swimming pool. And he's got this Rhode Island Red in a container on the patio by that swimming pool. And there's no shade. You know that sun is shining off that water, hitting that, and that Rhode Island Red, just gorgeous. It's a tank. It can handle heat well. It can handle heat being in a container well, and you get that classic look.
A lot of people think that Rhode Island Red is a classic introduction because it has that classic bloodgood style leaf, but this is a new introduction. It was found by Rhode Island nurseries, and it has just that compact nature that everybody wants for a dwarf bloodgood, essentially. I mean, it has that bloodgood style leaf, but that compact shape on it is perfect. It makes this perfect sort of round ball out there. The very first time that I saw Rhode Island Red wasn't that long ago. It was probably 2012, 2011. I was at NJ Acer's, Ed Shin's garden in Wall, New Jersey, and I saw in this perfect blue pot this perfectly shaped little red dwarf bloodgood style. And I was like, that's beautiful. And I just started taking photos. I mean, it is an amazing container plant. And that's something to consider too with many of these containers is the container itself. I mean, you think about these containers, you can add color contrast on the container. Put a red or yellow Japanese maple in that blue pot, and you're going to have some dynamics on the colors playing off each other in your patio garden.
Oh, absolutely. So important. Just the color of your pot and texture of it, you're adding, you know, a play not just off of the plant that's in the pot, but all the other plants that you have around and on the patio.
Yeah, and I think that's just something that people really need to pay attention to is the container itself. And these containers, you know, Japanese maples are good in zones 5 through 9, but in a container, they're typically good 6 through 9. So one consideration you should always think about with your Japanese maple in a container is this tree going to be fine outside in the cold? sometimes, you can just bring those containers up near your home and keep them warm during the winter in some mild climates. But if you're in a zone 6B, you're going to be good mostly leaving them outside year round in that container.
You talk about that, and then, it just makes me think my in-laws, they're in Colorado, and they came from Tennessee to Colorado. And when they were in Tennessee, they had Japanese maples all over their property. And then when they got to Colorado, they go, we can't grow these here. I'm like, hold up. You can grow in a container. And during the winter, they bring them into an unheated garage. They make sure that it gets necessary water over that time, not overwater. You don't have to, still need water even though, but unheated garage. And they have success with them. And then once they're through any type of frost or anything like that, or the cold weather, they bring them out. They put them under some bigger trees for that shade because, the sun is intense in Colorado, but they have zero problem growing Japanese maples in containers.
That's an awesome way to be able to grow and have a Japanese maple in your patio, even if you're not in a zone where you typically would grow a Japanese maple. So something really cool, really different, and a unique way to do them in containers for sure.
And, so another recommendation, how can we skip on King Macawa?
The original Macawa Yatubusa. Macawa Yatubusa is a dwarf green Japanese maple that looks like a little bonsai out there. It's got a tightly layering habit and a larger green leaf. The leaves are very pointed. But that layering habit makes it look like it's wearing clothes. It makes it look like it's this little fuzzball out there. It's got fur or something on it. It's very awesome in the way the tightly laying structure is, and it will put little arms out there that just sort of shake slightly in the wind that look like a creature in your garden.
And when we say, Macawa Yatubusa, really you could go with any of the Macawa family ones. And, you can get more than one. You can get one that's got some variegation to it and contrasts with the colors off of that. And something, to keep in mind when you do bring this, plants up, we're talking about Rhode Island Red. So you're bringing that red up to the patio. Well, you're talking about Macawa, you got that green. So you're playing that red and green off of each other.
Macawa Yatubusa is one of my favorite trees. We, on our MrMaple Show on YouTube, we have often people's top 5s. And that's something we've always asked people. If you go watch some of our videos of us going visiting World Maple Park in Japan, we're asking Masayoshi Yano what his favorite Japanese maple is. If you're watching us going and visiting, or when we went and, for instance, we met Peter Gregory, who wrote the book on Japanese maples, good friend of ours. He became a good friend of ours. We would ask him what your favorite Japanese maple is. And everybody's answer, I didn't say everybody, but the majority of the answers all came together as Macawa Yatubusa. When Matt was on the executive board of the Maple Society before he became the president, one of the presidents of it, we're both past presidents of the North American branch of the Maple Society. He started the Maple of the Year program. And with the Maple of the Year program, Macawa Yatubusa became the very first Maple of the Year. And it's because it has this unique texture on its foliage, on its bright green leaves. It's easy, it's durable, it's such a beautiful tree to have out there. It looks like a little bonsai out there, but like a bonsai covered in, just these beautiful, almost a green fur almost. The way it is so tightly layering. And it's so different. And that's why people love it, is because this one stands out from the crowd. And that's what we want our gardens to do. We want our gardens to stand out from the crowd and give us something lively out there. Give us something unique. Give us something different. Give us something that people want to talk about. And that's what you get with a Macawa Yatubusa, is a tree that gives something interesting very visually that people will be talking about.
Yeah, I think any of these recommendations make great, great trees for the patio. And it's just, there's something about sitting on your patio and having your garden be part around you. It's nice to, you see some gardens that have seating areas. Well, why not your patio? And that, all these recommendations, it's just, whether it's the entrance into your garden or the entrance into your yard, but being able to use your patio as part of the garden, just killer.
And I like the fact that we've got such diversity in maples that you can choose so many interesting types. Let's just talk about Macawa Yatubusa for a moment and its diversity. Macawa Yatubusa is amazing by itself, but because it's so amazing, there's been so many selections made from Macawa Yatubusa that make great container plants as well. We have introduced a variety called Red Panda, and it is one of the best red forms of Macawa Yatubusa. Tightly layering habit, good red color, red, that spring interest is just out there in the spring with some of that bold red. And then after that, during the summer, it's green, but you get red new growth on that as well. And so that's just one color variation. But then we look at something like Japanese Princess, selection by Talon Buchholz of Buchholz Nursery. And it's got a twisting leaf to it, tightly layering habit. It was found as a seedling from a giant Macawa Yatubusa, and it's got some really nice pink color to it in the early spring. And so you can start looking at the color variations of even a style like Macawa Yatubusa and select something that you like, that you think is going to make your garden different, make your garden pop, and make your patio really enjoyable.
And also we're talking about patio planting, and with the containers at this point, I think you can use this also as an opportunity. Sometimes you might live in a climate that when you get, especially, and I've been guilty of it myself, where I've gone out into the greenhouse and I'm like, ooh, I need to get one of these. And I take it home and I put it out and it's like, whoa, I've been sitting in the greenhouse and now you're sticking me out here. Your patio is a great way that if you get one of these in a 1 gallon and it comes home, put it in a container and let it sit on your patio for the season and let it acclimate to your area. So, you can use your container planting on your patio as a way to get your plants ready for the ground. So when you might have a spot, I got a spot in my garden. Well, use your patio as a way to let it acclimate and get used to your area before you put it in the ground. Yeah,
that's a great point. I mean, there are certain times of the season that are better planting seasons than others for certain areas. For us here in West North Carolina, we can plant anytime the ground's not frozen. So we can plant year round here. But say you're in Michigan and you can only plant in the spring once the ground has really started to thaw a little bit. That is a great way. You can have it get it during the summer, enjoy it in a container, put it in your garden, put it in your garage during the winter, pull it back out when you're ready to plant.
Absolutely.
A lot of great ways to do that.
Absolutely.
When it comes to Japanese maples and containers, there's nothing else better. When it comes to Japanese maples for your patio planting, it's a great way to be able to enjoy the diversity in the size, shape, color, and those non-invasive roots that Japanese maples can provide. I think it makes them great for your gardens around your patio, your landscape around your patio. And it's something that adds class and sophistication in a way that many other plants cannot do. And they're sort of the bone structure of the garden. They're the plants that when you put them out there, it's easier to put the other trees around because your Japanese maples are going to be the focal point, and these other trees can sort of play with that symphony in your garden.
So before I mentioned about using it as a walkway into your garden, but it doesn't just have to be that. It can be part of the garden. And I think that's really what I want to stress about patio garden is that it is the garden, but it's also an extension of the house. It's an outdoor area. I think back to when we were at the Maple Society tour, that one of the guests that hosted one of the evenings went to go see their garden, and they had, where you walked out, they had this patio, and the way it was lined out was just this natural, where it was an extension of the whole property with that garden. So keep in mind that what you do on your patio should be cohesive with what's going out on the landscape. It shouldn't be viewed as two separate areas. Don't think of your patio as just a room. Think of it as part of the entire garden.
I think it's a great way to do that. I mean, your whole garden just can tie together, and there's no reason why you should have your patio and then your garden. You should have your garden over here and your patio garden, and all those are together. They're all part of your garden. They're all part of where you should be enjoying plants and have that lively feel when you're outside. Y'all, Japanese maples are excellent. They're amazing, and they're great for your patio containers. They're great for your patio garden. And We've talked about some recommendations with the Seiryu to add that shade, the Fire Glow to add that glowing effect with that vertical interest and some good shade. Not blocking your garden. You got those Golden Falls and Kiome that can give you some unique colors, unique shapes out there. And if you're going for containers, Rhode Island Red, Macawa Yatubusa, those are excellent recommendations. Y'all, I hope you've enjoyed today's video on patio planning. I hope it gets your brain thinking a little bit about the thought processes on how you can use a Japanese maple in your patio garden itself. That's what we try to do here, is get you thinking about how to use these gardens and, what you consider, and give you some good recommendations that you can use in your own garden to get that something that you can enjoy and something that is low maintenance free.
And if you like this podcast and this type of stuff, make sure to go back to the MrMaple Show and check out the other videos. We did one on walkway. We did one on background, foundation planting,
focal point planting.
So go check all these out. We're doing this as a podcast because people said, well, this should be a podcast, but we have these other videos. So go check out our other recommendations, for the different styles or for where you're planting.
Y'all, I hope you've enjoyed videos today. If you like this type of content, make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform, but also make sure you're subscribed over on our YouTube channel. And we'd really appreciate it if you shopped your Japanese maples with us on MrMaple.com.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.